The city of Rome is a labyrinth of time. To walk its streets is to step upon centuries stacked like pages in an eternal book, each layer a palimpsest of lives, beliefs, and forgotten worlds. Imperial palaces crumble beneath Renaissance churches. Medieval alleys wind over ancient sewers, and buried only inches below the cobblestones lie realms that the sun has not touched in 2,000 years. Rome is not simply a city, it is a graveyard of gods. And sometimes, when builders break through the cellar of a modern shop or tunnel for new foundations, the dead gods stir again. It was during one such unremarkable excavation that workers stumbled upon something that was not a senator's villa, nor the warehouse of a forgotten merchant. Instead, they uncovered a chamber, carved with deliberate secrecy, hidden beneath the city's veins of stone. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and damp. The flicker of lantern light revealed not storage jars or mosaic floors, but a sanctuary, a cave not natural, but shaped by human hands, a sanctuary hollowed into the earth like a wound. Upon its altar, frozen in the stillness of stone, was a drama that must have struck those first witnesses as both bewildering and terrible. A youthful god, cloaked in a tunic and wearing the soft, pointed cap of the East, pressed his knee upon the flank of a mighty bull. With one hand he wrenched back the beast's nostrils, forcing its neck into an agonized arch. In the other, a dagger gleamed, frozen mid-thrust, ready to pierce flesh. Around the bull writhed companions of shadow, a dog leaping toward the wound, a snake coiled to drink the flowing lifeblood, and a scorpion fastening its claws upon the animal's genitals. This was no ordinary sacrifice. It was a tableau of cosmic violence, chiseled with reverence. The first observers must have shivered, for the air itself seemed to whisper that this scene was not meant for mortal eyes. It was the central icon of a religion whispered about even in its own day as a faith of secrecy and darkness. A god worshipped in hidden chambers, beneath the earth, in imitation of caverns that symbolized the very womb of the cosmos. A brotherhood that met not in open plazas but in shadowed vaults, by the dim flame of lamps, bound together by oaths never to be spoken aloud. This was no minor household cult. For centuries it had stretched across the empire, a rival to the nascent force of Christianity, and for a time it flourished with astonishing power. And yet, today, we remember almost nothing. The god's name Mithras survives like a ghostly echo, but the meaning of his mysteries has been swallowed by silence. All that remains are these altars, these stone fragments of forgotten prayers. Unlike the gods of Olympus or the deities of Egypt, Mithras left no sacred book, no scroll of hymns, no written testament of belief. His cult passed from the earth like smoke, leaving only images of bull and serpent, dagger and blood. To understand why such a faith was practiced, why men risked their souls in chambers beneath the earth, we must first return to this haunting discovery beneath Rome. For here lies the beginning of the unraveling. What did this violent image mean to those who gathered in shadow? Was it a sacrifice, a curse, or a creation myth? Why was it always found in hidden caves, replicated from Britain to Syria with unwavering precision? And why did it vanish so utterly, erased as though it had never been? The answers are veiled, but the questions themselves are powerful, like keys that invite us deeper into the labyrinth. To follow them is to walk through a door into darkness, into the realm where mystery religions flourished, where the Romans confronted gods who did not dine in the daylight but demanded worship in silence and secrecy. And yet, there is something uncanny about the cave itself. The bull, the dagger, the serpent, they do not merely tell a story, they radiate symbolism. To those who have studied myth across cultures, the slaying of the bull whispers of ancient echoes. In the temples of Mesopotamia, the bull was a beast of heaven, tethered to cosmic power. In Anatolia, the dying bull's blood was said to nourish the earth, giving rise to grain and vines. Even in the far north, echoes of horned beasts sacrificed for the fertility of land, and people emerge in half-forgotten sagas. Here, beneath Rome, the pattern was repeated with unsettling clarity. But in the Mithraic cave, the story sharpened into something more profound. This was no seasonal rite, no simple plea for harvest. This was a drama of eternity. The gods themselves, dog, serpent, scorpion, were constellations, etched into stone as a cipher of the heavens. The bull was not merely an animal but a sign of the age of Taurus, the cosmic era that had reigned for 2 millennia. Mithras, by plunging his dagger, was ending that age and heralding a new one. Creation and destruction were bound in the same stroke. Those first workers in Rome could not have known any of this as they stared into the darkness of the chamber, lanterns trembling in their hands. But perhaps they felt it, in the marrow of their bones. Perhaps they sensed that this was more than rubble, that the cave itself was a wound in time, and that what lay upon the altar was no statue, but an eternal secret, one meant to be seen only by the initiated, one meant to haunt anyone who looked upon it unprepared. It is here, at this threshold, that our journey begins. To understand Mithras, to glimpse even a shadow of his meaning, we must be willing to follow him into the dark, into the caves beneath Rome, into the borderlands of empire, into the silent stones that whisper of a god born not of woman but of rock, who slayed a bull to birth the stars, and who held the loyalty of men who would die for him, and yet who is now forgotten. The story begins beneath the city, where the torchlight flickered over carved stone, where the air smelled of damp earth and vanished incense, where the god of silence still waits. From that first breach into the Roman underworld, the thread continued to unspool. What seemed a singular oddity beneath a city of saints revealed itself as the first bead on a rosary that circled the entire world of the Caesars. As archaeologists and chance laborers pried open other cellars, dug new foundations, or shored up crumbling walls, more chambers came to light, rooms sealed from daylight, deliberately narrow and low, like the throat of the earth itself. Each time, the lamp soot told the same story. Men huddled in the half-dark, faces lifted toward a stone horizon, where a young god pressed his knee into the back of a dying bull. The pattern repeated with an unnerving regularity. The hidden temples were not confined to Rome. They surfaced at the very edges of empire, where civilization frayed into marsh and mountain and desert. Along the rain-scoured length of Hadrian's Wall in distant Britain, soldiers kept the night watch against northern ghosts, and beneath their barracks lay chambers of carved secrecy. At frontier forts posted on the frozen banks of the Rhine and Danube, where the empire's iron met the barbarian's breath, the same caves waited, narrow benches flanking a central aisle, an apse where the god and bull faced eternity, and walls that remembered the heat of breath and wine. Across the wine-bright Mediterranean, in the bustling port cities of North Africa, where sailcloth cracked in the sun and the market smelled of salt and spices, the same icon flickered in lamplight. Even in the far-flung desert outpost of Dura Europos in Syria, where rivers braided through dust and the wind hissed like an unseen serpent, there lay a sanctuary whose silence could only be broken by the whisper of oaths. And always, the same image presided: the god, the bull, the snake, the scorpion, the leaping dog whose muzzle reached for blood as if for knowledge, the twin torchbearers, mirrored as if the world itself were a hinge of light and shadow. This repetition was not a coincidence. It was a creed carved in stone. A traveler could cross 1,000 miles, step down into a chamber in a different tongue and climate, and know at once where he stood. The stones spoke one language. This sameness carried meaning beyond aesthetics. The empire was a mosaic of gods and household spirits, of local shrines and provincial rites that changed their masks as cities changed their dialects. But Mithras did not shapeshift. He arrived intact, a god with a fixed grammar, a doctrine rendered in chisels instead of letters. The cult's icon was a compass rose, by which initiates oriented themselves, a star map stamped upon the memory of men who could be transferred from Britain to Syria and still find the sky unaltered underground. This was not a scattering of local devotions. It was a network tensed like a web whose strands ran along roads cut by legionaries, across seas patrolled by grain fleets, and through markets where contracts were sealed with eyes and handshakes. Consider the implications. In a world where novelty was suspect and ancientness was proof of divinity, this cult moved with the quiet confidence of a religion already old. Its temples were modest in size but immense in agreement. The benches were always there, built like flanking ribs, the central aisle always narrow, forcing the body to move with care, the mind to move with reverence. The vaulted ceiling often painted as night, pinpricks of stars, a blue so dark it drank the lamps, the apse, the altar, the relief, an architecture of inevitability. One might say the Mithraeum did not merely house an image, it enacted a cosmology. To enter was to step into a diagram of the world. And so, what began as a whisper beneath Rome became a hum beneath the empire. Soldiers joined in one province and found brothers in the next. Merchants who skirted the sea lanes from Ostia to Carthage to Alexandria discovered, beneath the open-air trade of wheat and wine and papyrus, a second commerce, one of sacred tokens, passwords, and shared meat. Freedmen and slaves tasted in these chambers a liberty the daylight did not grant, for rank above ground did not determine rank below. The cult traveled not in decrees or public festivals, but in the hearts of men who longed for order in chaos, for a star to steer by within the fog of empire. Yet it was not merely practicality that yoked these chambers together. The image they shared was a riddle and a vow. In some reliefs, the tip of the bull's tail flowered into 3 stalks of wheat, a quiet proclamation that from sacrifice springs sustenance. In others, a raven perched, its beak open as if bearing messages from the Sunday. In a few, the god glanced away from the wound he made, as though seeing beyond the act into the consequence, the tilled fields, the bread, the wine, the brothers. This was a ritual theater that required no translation. The initiate's body played its part simply by entering the space, by sitting where countless others had sat, by raising cup and hand within the same proportions of stone. We, who tilt our heads toward history, as if to catch a sound from an adjoining room, can almost hear what passed in these places. The low rasp of ritual responses, the scrape of sandals on grit, the cup's lip kissed by wine, the exchanged pressure of palms, the synodexio, those united by the handshake. But we cannot hear the words. We do not possess their prayers. No booklet of hymns or initiatory catechism has survived to tell us, in lines of ink, what the stone tells in curves and beasts. Even as the number of discovered temples grew into the hundreds, the silence grew with them, like a shadow cast by every flame. Paradox sharpened into revelation, a religion everywhere, and yet voiceless, universal in image, but secret in speech. The more Mithraea we found, the clearer it became that Mithraism had been a highly organized, unified, and astonishingly successful international faith, one that operated beneath the notice, and, at times, under the patronage of the very men who wore the purple. These were not the makeshift shrines of a vagrant cult. They were deliberate installations, a parallel architecture running under the empire like a second bloodstream. And still, the stones withheld their grammar. We have inscriptions, dedications, donor names, the abbreviated pieties of altar bases, but no scripture. We have reliefs with legions of symbols, but no key signed by a believer's hand. In the absence of a book, the temples themselves are the text, the benches its lines, the vault its sky, the relief its theology. The cult wrote in chambers instead of chapters, and time has torn out every page but these. It is tempting to imagine one of those far-flung temples at dusk, an officer back from patrol, a groom with hands still smelling of horsehair, a merchant's clerk whispering figures he can never afford, a freedman stoic, but unsure whose freedom he wears. They descend. The room is narrow, bodies warm it quickly. The priest father to them gestures toward the image. The torches are lifted. The twin bearers on the relief answer with their eternal lights, one up, one down. Bread, meat, wine. The theatre of salvation repeats, as it has repeated in Britain, on the Rhine, in Numidia, in Syria. The image is the same, and that sameness becomes a comfort. The cosmos is constant here. The ceiling stars remain fixed, even when the frontiers crumble. This is how the cult traveled so far and so quietly. Not by argument, but by architecture. Not by trumpets, but by tunnels. A man's tongue might fail him in a foreign market. His coin might be strange, his gods unwelcome. But in the earth's throat, beneath a fort or warehouse, He could sit on a bench already shaped to his kind and place his faith where countless knees had leaned before. And when the priest raised his hand, the scene before them, the god, the bull, the dog, the snake, the scorpion, would resolve into a promise older than law, that the world has an order, written in blood and stars, and that a man may find his place within it. By the time scholars recognized the pattern, the map of Mithraism had become a constellation in its own right, each temple a star that once flared with vows and is now cold to the touch. We connect them with lines because we must. The human mind loves a figure where there might be none. Yet in this case, the figure is undeniable. The Brotherhood's reach was imperial, its discipline severe, its icon immutable. In a world of 1,000 shrines, Mithras spoke with one face. But a face, however enduring, cannot sing. The empire's most widespread mystery kept its mystery well. The stones lead us down and seat us, and we look where generations looked. We see what they saw. We feel the room contain us like a held breath. Then we reach for the words, and the cave gives us only the hush that made the words sacred in the first place. It is from that hush that our next question rises. If the temples say so much, why do the texts say nothing? To find that answer, we must press our ear to the other side of the door, the side where enemies spoke for the faithful, and where scholarship mistook echoes for origins. The silence of the stone will soon meet the noise of theory, and both will shape the shadow we call a history. From Britain's windswept walls to Syria's sand-choked forts, the underground chambers of Mithras emerged like bones after a storm. Each sanctuary carried the same reliefs, the same benches, the same silent symmetry, and yet, for all their abundance, they told us almost nothing. This is the great paradox of Mithraism. Hundreds of temples, thousands of inscriptions, scores of statues, and no scripture, no book of prayers, no hymnal, no holy gospel of Mithras to guide us through the labyrinth of meaning. The most widespread mystery faith of the Roman Empire, the one that rivaled Christianity in its reach, left behind only mute stone and hostile testimony from its enemies. It is as if a vast cathedral had been uncovered with every stained glass window intact, every altar still in place, every seat unbroken, yet no Bible, no sermon notes, no words at all. The cult's voice is a silence that deepens the more we listen. Archaeologists have tried to piece together the fragments. Altars inscribed with dedications survive, names of men, often soldiers or merchants, who gave thanks to Mithras for salvation or victory. The dedications are terse, formulaic. They confirm devotion, but reveal nothing of doctrine. Statues of Mithras slaying the bull, of Sol the sun riding his chariot, of Luna the moon gazing down, all survive in abundance. But they are images without captions, like illustrations torn from a lost manuscript. In their absence, scholars have had no choice but to reconstruct, to guess, to stitch together interpretations from art, astronomy, and hostile polemic. The faith itself remains a puzzle of shadows. And this is where the story of Mithras darkens into true enigma. We know the form of the religion, but not its soul. The silence itself seems intentional. Mystery religions thrived on secrecy. To be initiated was to be reborn into a brotherhood, bound by oaths never to reveal what the uninitiated could not bear. Words written down could be stolen, profaned, or mocked, but stone could be trusted. A relief could conceal meaning in plain sight, readable only to the trained gaze. To the outsider, the bull slaying might look like brutality. To the initiate, it was salvation. To the scholar, centuries later, it is an unsolved cipher. It is not only the absence of sacred texts that wounds our understanding. The only surviving words about Mithraism come not from its followers, but from its enemies. Christian polemicists, the Church Fathers, saw Mithras as a diabolical counterfeit, a demonic parody of Christ. They describe him with loathing, branding the cult as satanic imitation. Tertullian sneered that the devil had preemptively copied Christian sacraments to lead men astray. Justin Martyr accused the cult of a profane mockery of baptism and communion. To them, Mithras was not a savior, but a shadow cast by hell. And yet, even through their venom, Details flicker. They speak of initiatory trials, ordeals by fire, by water, by hunger. They describe sacred meals, bread and wine shared in the presence of the god. They acknowledge the oath that sealed the Brotherhood, a vow so binding that to break it was worse than death. But we must handle their words with care, for the Church Fathers were not historians. They were rivals, locked in a battle for souls. Their accounts are drenched in propaganda, poisoned by hatred, designed to discredit. They saw Mithras not as a fellow mystery, but as an antichrist. To rely upon them is to sip from a chalice laced with venom. And so, between mute stone and hostile scripture, the cult of Mithras exists for us as a ghost, a religion we can map but not hear, a sacred drama whose actors stand frozen but whose script is gone, a god who was worshipped by emperors, soldiers, merchants, and slaves, and yet who speaks to us now only through silence. Perhaps this was always the design. Silence itself was the gospel. To enter the cave was to abandon words, to surrender to image, symbol, and ritual. The darkness, the flicker of lamps, the sound of wine poured into a cup, these were the scriptures written on the body, not the page. To the initiate, secrecy was power. To us, it is absence. But silence is never neutral. Into that void, interpretations rush like wind into a tomb. For more than a century, scholars have fought to decode the images, to pull meaning from the stone. And at the dawn of this inquiry, one man believed he had found the key. His name was Franz Cumont, and he would cast a Persian shadow across Mithras that still lingers today. When the silent stones of Mithras first stepped into the light of modern scholarship, they brought with them a question that seemed to demand an Eastern answer. The name Mithras itself rang with echoes of Persia. In the ancient world, Mithra was known as a great Iranian deity, a god of covenants, of truth, and of cosmic order. He appeared in Zoroastrian texts as a guardian of oaths and a witness to the bonds between men. The Romans themselves associated his Phrygian cap, his flowing garments, and his aura of mystery with the East, with a wisdom both feared and revered. So when the Belgian historian Franz Cumont, at the turn of the 20th century, laid eyes upon the bull-slaying god of the Roman underworld, the conclusion felt obvious. With monumental confidence, he declared Mithraism to be the Roman branch of Zoroastrian Mazdaism, an Eastern tree transplanted into Western soil. He saw in the name, the costumes, and the aura of secrecy, a direct importation. Soldiers and merchants, he argued, had carried Mithra from Persia into Rome, where his cult spread like fire along the empire's military frontiers. Cumont's theory was elegant, persuasive, and above all ancient in its appeal. To say that Rome's dark mystery came from the East fit neatly with Roman imagination itself, for the Romans were always eager to claim that their gods were born elsewhere in Egypt, in Babylon, in Persia. Ancientness was authority, foreignness was authenticity. By painting Mithras as a Persian visitor, Cumont gave the cult both pedigree and pedigree's allure. His grand synthesis dominated the field for half a century, as unquestioned as scripture. But every mirage eventually dissolves. The fatal flaw lay at the very heart of the myth. If the Roman Mithras was truly the Persian Mithra, then the most central act of his cult, the Tauroctony, the slaying of the bull, should appear in Persian sources. Scholars scoured the Avesta, the Zoroastrian hymns, for any trace of such a story. They searched Persian art, inscriptions, and reliefs for a god with dagger poised above a bull. They looked to temples carved in stone along the Iranian plateau, and they found nothing. The Persian Mithra was mighty, yes, guardian of contracts, protector of justice, and friend of the Sunday, but never a bull slayer. In Zoroastrian cosmology, the bull was not an enemy to be slain, but a holy creature, central to creation itself. Its death, when it did appear in myth, came at the hands of an evil spirit, not a savior. To claim that the Roman Mithras took his essence from Persia was to build upon sand. This absence struck like a hammer blow. Cumont's beautiful edifice cracked. The very image repeated in every Mithraeum, the god pressing his knee into the bull, the serpent drinking its blood, The scorpion at its genitals was nowhere in Persia. The Roman cult had borrowed the name and the garments, but not the story. In this collapse, scholars glimpsed a more unsettling truth, that the Roman cult of Mithras was not a relic imported from the East but an invention of the West. Somewhere in the late 1st or early 2nd century, a founder or a circle of founders wove together threads of Persian imagery, Roman philosophy, and the new science of astrology to craft a religion that looked ancient while being entirely new. It was, in essence, a sacred masquerade, a god with an exotic mask hiding a Roman heart. Yet the Mirage was not without purpose. In Rome, novelty was suspect. A new god was dangerous, unproven, and often ridiculed. But an old god, especially one clothed in the mystery of Persia, bore the weight of timeless truth. The Egyptians had their hieroglyphs, the Babylonians their stars, the Persians their inscrutable rites. To invoke their names was to borrow their power, and so the Roman founders of Mithraism cloaked their invention in Eastern garb, baptizing it in the aura of Zoroaster while crafting an entirely original drama. It was a stroke of genius, a created antiquity, an invented tradition that gave the cult legitimacy even as it whispered of forbidden knowledge. The temples, carved to resemble caves, became places where Rome's men could step not just underground, but into the illusion of timelessness, into a drama that claimed to be as old as the stars themselves. The Persian Mirage held sway for half a century, shaping not only scholarship but the very way we still imagine Mithras, a god of the East smuggled into Rome. But the truth is stranger. Mithras was a Roman creation with a Persian mask, a god born of deliberate artifice, designed to dazzle, to deceive, and to endure. And if Mithras was an invention, then the question sharpens. Who was the inventor? And what story did they truly mean to tell when they placed a dagger in the hand of a god and drove him into the flank of a bull? The answer begins not with conquest or scripture, but with birth. For before the cave, before the sacrifice, before the cosmic feast, there was the moment when Mithras himself first entered the world, not from the womb of a mother, but from the eternal body of stone. When the great Persian hypothesis shattered, the fragments revealed something at once more mundane and more mysterious. Mithraism was not an inheritance from the East at all, but a Roman creation. Somewhere in the late 1st or early 2nd century, in the belly of an empire that spanned the world, a religious genius or a circle of them wove together fragments of philosophy, astrology, and borrowed symbolism into a new fabric of faith. This was not theft, but artistry. The name Mithras was no accident. To invoke a Persian god was to borrow the aura of ancient wisdom, to dress a new invention in the robes of eternity. To place a Phrygian cap upon the god's head was to signal foreignness, and thus legitimacy in Roman eyes, for the Romans always believed the truest mysteries came from elsewhere. Egypt had its hieroglyphs, Babylon its stargazers, Persia its magi. By cloaking Mithras in their garb, the founder disguised novelty as antiquity, granting his cult the prestige of an exotic origin. Modern scholars call this an invented tradition, but in the ancient world it was a ritual act of genius, an act of sacred branding. Rome was suspicious of novelty in religion, a faith that admitted its youth could be mocked or ignored, but a faith that claimed roots in the ancient East could thrive. And so Mithraism presented itself as timeless, even as it was freshly minted, a Roman god with a Persian mask. But invention does not mean falsehood. To the initiates who entered the caves, this was no trick, no shallow charade. They encountered not merely the illusion of antiquity, but the living weight of a myth that bound their lives into cosmic order. The cave was designed as a universe in miniature. The benches along its walls were not only seats, but stages in a celestial ascent. The icon of the bull-slaying god was more than a borrowed motif. It was a new mythology carved with surgical precision, as if to stitch the stars themselves into the body of Rome. Consider the brilliance of its construction. At its heart, the Tauroctony, the slaying of the bull, is an image both violent and fertile. To the uninitiated, it looks like sacrifice. To the initiated, it was creation. Wheat sprouting from the bull's tail, blood turning into wine, life flowing from death. The symbolism was so dense so layered that it could satisfy both the soldier seeking courage, the philosopher seeking truth, and the slave seeking hope. It was a faith that could hold many meanings at once, each accessible only to those prepared to climb its ladder of mysteries. Here, we glimpse the mind of the founder. He was not a provincial priest repeating inherited prayers. He was a syncretist, fluent in multiple traditions: Roman ritual, Greek philosophy, Eastern astrology. He understood that a god must not only save, but astonish. And so Mithras was born not in the lineage of Olympus, not in the genealogies of Homer's epics, but from the primal body of stone itself. Petra generatus, born from rock. This was no ordinary myth. To be rock-born was to be without parentage, without debt, without past. Mithras emerged not as a child of another deity, but as a cosmic force in his own right, a god who owed nothing to those who came before him, who carried his destiny at birth. Images show him bursting forth from stone, dagger in one hand, torch in the other, already armed with the instruments of his future sacrifice. The symbolism is intoxicating. In a world crowded with gods, each tangled in divine genealogy, Mithras was sui generis, self-generated, elemental, inevitable. He did not inherit creation. He enacted it. He was the stone that spoke, the silence that bled. He stood outside the tangled stories of Olympus, outside the courts of Jupiter, Venus, and Mars. He was primal. He was necessary. The rock birth was not only myth, but ritual invitation. To step into a Mithraeum was to imitate the god, to enter the earth's body, to be reborn in stone. Every initiate who swore the oath, who passed through the trials of fire and hunger, was in a sense rock-born as well, cut loose from his past, forged anew in secrecy. The god's myth was not a story told, it was an experience lived. And in this, we see the true genius of Mithraism's invention. It did not merely tell men what to believe, it drew them into a symbolic cosmos where belief was enacted, where myth was embodied. The cult's founder had built a machine of transformation, a ladder of the soul disguised as a cave, a map of the stars hidden in a sacrifice, a salvation carved into stone. This was the invention Rome accepted, embraced, and feared. A religion that appeared Persian, but was in truth Roman. A god who wore the mask of antiquity, but who was as new and radical as the empire itself. A brotherhood that demanded silence and secrecy, but offered, in return, a vision of the cosmos in which every man could find his place. And if Mithras was born from rock, then the next step in the story is inevitable. Before we can understand the slaying of the bull, we must first stand at the moment of his creation. The god himself emerges from stone, dagger flashing, torch blazing, as if to light the way for those who would follow him into the dark. Before the bull, before the banquet, before the shadowed temples spread like secret veins beneath the empire, there was a birth unlike any other. Mithras did not descend from a heavenly father, nor did he emerge from the womb of a divine mother. He was not written into the tangled genealogies of the Olympians, nor woven into the family trees of Babylonian gods. Mithras was Petra generatus, rock-born. He burst forth fully formed from the body of the earth itself, carrying in his hands the tools of his destiny, a dagger to pierce, a torch to illumine. The ancient images show him erupting from a stone, as if it were a living womb. His body is strong, muscular, already youthful yet eternal, clothed in the Phrygian cap and Eastern garb that marked him as otherworldly. In some depictions, the stone splits open like a seed pod, revealing the god within. In others, flames crown his emergence, suggesting not just a birth, but a cosmic ignition. The god comes not as a child, but as a warrior, armed, alert, and inevitable. To the initiates, this moment was no metaphor. It was the proof of a god who owed nothing to past or precedent. He was unbegotten, unbound, a primal force whose existence was its own justification. Unlike Jupiter, who inherited Saturn's throne, or Apollo, born of Zeus and Leto, Mithras stood apart. He was not an heir, but a creation ex nihilo. In a world of dynastic gods, Mithras was radical independence. The symbolism is layered, resonant. In many traditions, stone is permanence, the eternal witness of temples, tombs, and mountains. To be born of stone is to be eternal, to be carved from the very bones of the cosmos. Yet stone is also silence, secrecy, a barrier that conceals what is within. The rock birth carried both meanings. Mithras was eternal and concealed, manifest and mysterious. This birth also spoke to the initiate's own journey. To descend into the cave of a Mithraeum was to imitate the god's genesis. The earth itself became the mother. The stone vault overhead was the cosmic rock from which the initiate would emerge reborn. Each stage of initiation was a chiseling away of the old self, until at last the candidate broke free, rock-born into brotherhood. Other cultures held myths of earth-born deities, but none so stark. In Greek legend, the Spartoi sprang from dragon's teeth sown into soil, fierce warriors born from the earth. In Orphic mysteries, Phanes, the radiant god, burst forth from the cosmic egg to bring light to chaos. In Mesopotamian myth, Enkidu was molded from clay, half man, half wild. Yet Mithras surpassed them all. He was not shaped by another, not sewn or molded. He tore himself from the living rock, a self-created flame. The dagger and the torch are crucial here. They were not symbols added later, but present from his very birth. The dagger prefigures the Tauroctony, the inevitable sacrifice that would bind the cosmos. The torch speaks of illumination, the light brought into darkness, the guide for souls wandering the cavern of life. Together, they made him both sacrificer and savior, destroyer and illuminator. He was at once the bringer of death and the giver of light. In some depictions, a stream of water or fire accompanies his emergence, reminding the viewer that Mithras was not just a god of flesh but of the cosmic elements. Water, fire, stone, he carried the primal triad in his very body. And so, when initiates beheld his image, they were not only seeing their god, they were seeing the world itself in miniature. The Roman mind, steeped in omens and auguries, would have felt the weight of such a birth. To be born from stone was to be unassailable. No woman's womb, no god's rivalry, no fragile lineage could limit him. He was older than the Caesars, older than Olympus, older even than memory. His myth claimed timelessness by sidestepping genealogy altogether. He did not inherit the world, he was the world, breaking through its crust like fire through rock. And yet, even in his birth, the seeds of his destiny were visible. To carry a dagger at birth is to promise blood. To raise a torch is to promise light. Mithras was born already bound to his act, the slaying of the bull, the spilling of the blood that would nourish creation. The rock birth was not merely an origin story, it was a prophecy in stone. In the Mithraeum, this imagery must have reverberated with power. Imagine an initiate, blindfolded, led down the narrow stairs, feeling the chill of earth against his skin. He is stripped of his name, his past, his identity. He kneels in darkness as the priest unveils the relief, the god, erupting from stone, dagger, and torch in hand. In that moment, the initiate's ordeal mirrors the god's. He too must be born of stone. He too must carry the tools of death and light. His soul is being carved from the silence, pressed into the shape of a myth that is both his own and not his own. Thus, before Mithras is the bull slayer, he is the rock born. Before he saves, he is stone. The silence of the stones that conceal his cult is mirrored in his very essence. His story begins not with a cry of birth, but with the crack of rock, the hush of dust, the sudden blaze of a torch in darkness. And so the stage is set. A god born of stone, carrying dagger and flame, stands ready to enact the mystery for which he was created. To understand him, we must turn to the act itself, the silent tableau that filled every Mithraeum from Britain to Syria. We must look at the Tauroctony, the slaying of the bull, and seek in its violence the seed of creation. At the heart of every Mithraeum, carved in stone or painted in fading pigments, lies the scene that defined the cult, the Tauroctony. It is a tableau repeated so faithfully across the empire that it became the very grammar of the faith. No matter the distance, whether in the damp forts of Britain or the sun-scoured deserts of Syria, the image remained the same. A young god kneels upon a bull, pulling its head back by the nostrils, and drives a dagger into its neck. Around this central act swarm a host of creatures and symbols, each frozen in eternal witness. To the modern eye, it is a scene of brutality. A vigorous youth, dressed in Eastern garb, commits a sacrifice with almost surgical precision. His expression is serene, detached, as if he were both executioner and priest. The bull strains beneath him, muscles taut, eyes wide with the moment of death. The wound is about to open, and with it, a flood of mystery. But for the ancient initiate, seated on the stone benches of the Mithraeum, this was no slaughterhouse. It was revelation. They did not see death. They saw life pouring forth. For in the details of the image, meaning blossomed. At the tip of the bull's tail, stalks of wheat sprout grain born from sinew, bread promised from blood. In some reliefs, rivulets from the wound become flowing vines, wine rising from sacrifice. The bull's death is not an ending, but a beginning, the seed of agriculture, of sustenance, of civilization itself. The companions around the bull amplify the message. A dog leaps toward the wound, eager to drink, symbol of loyalty, and the soul's hunger for divine nourishment. A snake coils below, tongue poised to taste the blood, emblem of death, rebirth, and the endless spiral of life. A scorpion claws at the bull's genitals, a reminder that fertility and mortality are entwined, that creation is birthed in violence as much as in love. In some depictions, a raven perches nearby, messenger of the sun, whispering of cycles yet to come. And always, flanking the scene, are the torchbearers, cortes and cortopates. They are twins, mirror images, each dressed like Mithras himself. One holds his torch aloft, flame pointing upward, symbol of rising light, of spring, of the dawn of life. The other holds his torch downward, symbol of descent, of autumn, of the dying Sunday. Together, they frame the act in cosmic rhythm, declaring that the bull's death is woven into the eternal dance of light and darkness. The initiate, sitting in the flickering lamplight, would have seen not gore but cosmos. The Tauroctony was no simple myth. It was a creation story carved into stone. The bull's body was the world itself, its death the moment of transformation that birthed life. Where others saw an ending, the initiate saw the seed of eternity. A rare inscription discovered beneath the Basilica of Santa Prisca in Rome confirms this interpretation. Painted words, fragmentary yet haunting, address the god with reverence. Et nos servasti sanguine eterno, and you have saved us by the shedding of eternal blood. To the Brotherhood of Mithras, the act upon the altar was not slaughter, but salvation. The bull's death redeemed, renewed, and sustained the cosmos. Yet the Tauroctony is more than agriculture, more than fertility. Its meaning is layered, inexhaustible. In the silence of the cave, it became a mirror in which each initiate saw his own path. To the soldier, it was courage, the hero god mastering a beast greater than himself. To the merchant, it was contract, the god fulfilling the ultimate oath by offering blood for life. To the slave, it was hope. Even suffering could become creation. Even death could yield freedom. But deeper still, the scene whispered of cosmic order. The torchbearers were not merely attendants. They were markers of time, guardians of equinox and solstice. The scorpion and serpent were not pests but constellations, fixed in the heavens. The tableau was a star map disguised as myth. Every creature, every gesture, was aligned with the vault of heaven. The cave itself, painted with stars, reinforced the truth. The bull's sacrifice was written into the cosmos. This is why the Tauroctony never varied. It could not. It was not local folklore but cosmic revelation. To alter it would have been to distort the map of the universe itself. The god and bull were more than figures. They were eternal archetypes, celestial truths fixed in the heavens. Yet for all its ubiquity, the Tauroctony remains enigmatic. Why a bull? Why this god, this act, repeated with such precision? Scholars argue still. Some see in it the memory of ancient pastoral rites, the blood of beasts spilled for fertility. Others trace it to astronomical phenomena, the great precession of the equinoxes, the passing of the age of Taurus into Aries. Still others read in it a mystical allegory of the soul, bound to flesh like the bull and liberated through sacrifice. Perhaps all are true. Perhaps the genius of Mithras was to bind them together, to weave myth, astronomy, and psychology into a single image that could satisfy soldier and philosopher alike. The Tauroctony was at once a ritual, a map, a story, and a promise. In the glow of lamplight, the initiates saw wheat sprouting where a tail should be, blood turning to wine, darkness framed by twin torches, stars whispered into animals. He saw life and death married in stone, and he knew that in this cave, beneath the empire, beneath the earth, beneath the turning of the heavens, salvation was enacted. Thus, the slaying of the bull was not death but cosmos, not destruction but rebirth. The god's dagger was the axis of the world, his act the ignition of eternity. Every Mithraeum repeated the scene because it was not just a story, it was the world itself, set in stone. And if the Tauroctony was a map, then what did it map? To answer that question, we must lift our gaze from the altar to the heavens. For above the god and bull lay not only myth, but stars, and the true key to the mystery may rest in the slow turning of the skies. The Tauroctony, carved again and again into the altars of Mithras, is more than myth. It is a cipher, a map etched in flesh and constellation. To the uninitiated, it was simply a god and a bull. To the Brotherhood, it was the heavens themselves captured in stone, a star chart hidden within a sacrifice. Look closely. The bull at the center is no ordinary beast. It is Taurus, the great constellation that dominated the spring sky for millennia. The dog leaping toward the wound is Canis Minor. The snake slithering beneath corresponds to Hydra, winding across the firmament. The scorpion clamped upon the bull's genitals is unmistakably Scorpio. The raven, sometimes perched on the god's cloak or hovering above, is Corvus. Even the chalice, sometimes depicted nearby, mirrors the constellation Crater. These were not random creatures chosen for a rustic tableau. They were the stars themselves, gathered in a cosmic drama. And Mithras, he does not belong to the herd of beasts. He is a part above. Many scholars see him as Perseus, the hero constellation, eternally poised above Taurus, in the night sky, dagger raised against the bull. Others propose Orion, hunter of the heavens, forever stalking his prey. In either case, Mithras is celestial, fixed among the constellations, his act written in starlight as surely as in stone. The torchbearers, Caute and Counterpates, deepen the astronomical reading. One holds his torch high, the flame pointing skyward. He is the rising sun at the spring equinox. The other points his torch downward. He is the setting sun at the autumn equinox. They are not mere attendants. They are markers of cosmic time, gatekeepers of light and dark. Together they declare that the bull's death is an event of cosmic rhythm, tied to the very heartbeat of the universe. But the true key lies in a phenomenon so slow, so subtle, that few in antiquity understood it: the precession of the equinoxes. Because of a gradual wobble in the Earth's axis, the position of the sun during the spring equinox drifts backward across the zodiac, shifting into a new constellation roughly every 2,160 years. This grand cycle marks the turning of cosmic ages, each age defined by the constellation that holds the equinox. For 2,000 years before Mithraism, the spring equinox had risen in Taurus. Humanity had lived in the age of the bull. But by the 1st century of the Roman Empire, the equinox was slipping into Aries, the ram. The age of Taurus was ending. A new cosmic order was dawning. And what do we see in the Tauroctony? Mithras driving his dagger into the bull, ending the age of Taurus. The snake, scorpion, dog, and raven mark the constellations around Taurus, fixing the moment in the sky. The torchbearers show the equinoxes themselves, the cosmic balance of light that makes the shift visible. The tableau is not only myth, it is astronomy. It is the heavens themselves turned into ritual. To the initiates, the message was profound. The cosmos was not eternal and static. It shifted, it breathed, it shed its ages like skin, and Mithras was the one who ended the old and began the new. He was not just a god of caves, he was the axis of time, the hand that moved the constellations. His sacrifice was the hinge of history. This interpretation, bold and elegant, has captivated modern scholars, yet others propose alternatives just as compelling. Some argue that Mithras himself is not Perseus but the sun, whose yearly journey slays the bull of winter to bring spring. Others see the Tauroctony not as the end of Taurus, but as a ritual of cosmic order, with Mithras depicted as the demiurge, the craftsman of the universe slaying primordial chaos to create the world. Whichever reading is true, one fact remains. The Tauroctony is never merely a picture of death. It is a diagram of creation. Every line, every creature, every symbol is astronomical, theological, and mystical at once. It is the universe condensed into an altar, a star map men could walk into and sit beneath. Imagine the initiate, seated on the stone bench, his body wrapped in shadow and lamplight. The priest points to the relief, the bull, the god, the serpent. He whispers the constellations, traces their shapes in the air, connects the sacrifice to the sky above the cave. In that moment, the initiate sees not only a myth, but the heavens themselves unfolding before his eyes. The act of Mithras is not long ago, it is happening now, written in the stars, turning the wheel of ages. And so the silent stones speak at last, not in words but in starlight. They tell of a cosmos where death is rebirth, where sacrifice is creation, where the god is both hunter and horizon. They whisper that the very skies above Rome and Britain and Syria are mirrors of the cave, that to kneel before the Tauroctony is to kneel before the universe itself. But this star map was not meant only for contemplation. It was meant for ritual, for enactment. The cult did not merely gaze at images, it performed them. And within certain Mithraea, archaeologists discovered something astonishing: altars that could turn, revealing a hidden truth. To understand this, we must step deeper into the chamber and watch the ritual unfold. The Tauroctony, fixed in stone across the empire, was never meant to be inert. It was not an icon to be passively admired, but a stage for ritual drama. In the dim light of oil lamps, with shadows writhing along star-painted vaults, the image of the bull's slaying came alive. The Mithraeum was not a museum, it was a theater, and the god's sacrifice was the script enacted again and again for those sworn to secrecy. In several sanctuaries, archaeologists found something unexpected: Tauroctony reliefs mounted not permanently into the wall, but upon pivots, designed to turn. When the slab was rotated, the reverse side revealed another image: Mithras, reclining beside Sol, the unconquered sun, feasting upon the very bull whose death had just been displayed. On one side, blood and sacrifice. On the other, wine and banquet, death and transfiguration, suffering and joy, written in stone that could be turned with the priest's hand. Imagine the effect upon the initiate. The chamber is dark, heavy with incense, lit only by trembling flames. The priest chants, the brothers respond, a solemn rhythm filling the narrow space. Before them, the god drives his dagger into the bull. The initiate feels the weight of sacrifice, the inevitability of death. Then, at the climactic moment, the slab groans upon its axis and turns. Where once there was death, now there is feast. Mithras and the sun reclining side by side, cups lifted in eternal celebration. The cave erupts with meaning. The god's sacrifice is no longer grim necessity, but joyous gift. The victim becomes the meal. The tragedy becomes communion. This ritual turning was not symbolic alone, it was participatory. The brothers themselves joined in the banquet, eating bread and meat, drinking wine. Archaeological traces confirm this. Animal bones scattered in the floors of Mithraea, residues of pork and poultry, shards of cups that once held wine. The earthly feast mirrored the divine one, binding the initiates to their god in the act of shared consumption. To eat in the cave was to eat at the cosmic table, to taste the salvation wrought by Mithras's hand. The cave itself reinforced this drama. Unlike the grand temples of Jupiter or Mars, Mithraea were narrow, windowless, often built underground or constructed to mimic caverns. The ceiling was painted deep blue and dotted with stars, the walls flanked by benches for communal meals, the apse crowned with the bull-slaying relief. The architecture was cosmology. Entering the Mithraeum meant stepping into the body of the universe. The benches became the orbiting spheres, the altar, the axis mundi, the ceiling, the firmament. To sit within was to leave the daylight world and enter eternity. And within this cosmic cave, ritual became transformation. The initiates were not spectators, but actors in the myth. They too passed through symbolic death and rebirth. They too shared in the feast of the gods. Their bodies echoed the cosmic drama, their lives inscribed into the myth's eternal cycle. Other mystery cults of Rome promised salvation through ritual, but Mithraism demanded immersion. The secrecy, the darkness, the ordeal, all worked to unmake the man who entered. He emerged not merely as himself, but as a participant in the god's sacrifice, bound to a brotherhood that transcended empire and bloodline. To understand this power, we must remember the Roman world was saturated with death. Soldiers faced it on the frontier, slaves in the fields, merchants on the sea. Life was fragile, fleeting. The Tauroctony, enacted and then transfigured into Banquet, offered a profound counter-narrative that death was not annihilation but transformation, that sacrifice was not loss but renewal. The rotating altar made this truth visible, tangible, inescapable. In this way, the Mithraeum was not merely a temple, but a machine of meaning, a device that compressed myth, cosmos, and ritual into a single space. The cave taught through architecture, stone, and action. To descend the stairs was to leave time. To witness the bull's death was to face mortality. To see the stone turn was to glimpse eternity. To eat the bread and drink the wine was to join the gods themselves. And yet, this was only the beginning. For the banquet was not the highest mystery, nor the feast the deepest initiation. Mithraism was a ladder, a path of ascent through 7 grades, each more demanding than the last. The banquet forged the brotherhood, but the true secret lay in the ordeals that stripped the soul, grade by grade, until the initiate could climb beyond the planets themselves. To see the whole of Mithras's mystery, we must climb that ladder now, rung by rung, through the trials of the 7 initiatory grades. Beneath the stone vault of the Mithraeum, the air thick with incense and the flicker of torches, the initiate did not enter as a mere worshipper. He entered as a candidate for transformation. Mithraism was not a religion of open altars and public prayers. It was a path, a ladder of the soul, climbed one rung at a time through trials and ordeals. There were 7 grades of initiation, each more profound than the last, each aligned with the planets that governed the heavens. To ascend them was to move through the cosmos itself, shedding one's mortal husk and drawing nearer to the eternal. The first grade was Corax the Raven. The raven was the messenger of the gods, associated with Mercury, swift and cunning. The initiate entered blindfolded, burdened, tested in obedience. He learned silence, humility, and service. In some accounts, he carried bread and water to the higher ranks, as if he were a shadow, unseen but necessary. To wear the name of Raven was to learn the discipline of listening, of watching, of bearing tidings between worlds. Next was Nymphus the bridegroom, linked to Venus. Here the candidate became betrothed to the god himself, veiled as though in sacred marriage. In ritual, he may have worn a bridal veil, symbolizing submission, purity, and the surrender of self. To be the Nymphus was to pledge devotion, to bind the soul, as a bride binds herself to her beloved. The veil was not humiliation, but transformation. The initiate became wedded to mystery itself. The third grade was Miles the soldier, under the red star of Mars. Here the candidate was branded or tattooed, marked as a warrior in Mithras's cosmic army. He swore an oath upon his sword, vowing loyalty to the Brotherhood unto death. He was tested with trials of endurance, perhaps scourging, perhaps hunger, certainly fire. The soldier emerged, scarred but proud, a man who no longer belonged to himself but to the legion of the god. The fourth was Leo the lion, associated with Jupiter and the element of fire. The lion roared in ritual, was anointed not with water but with honey. His tongue touched to sweetness instead of baptismal drink. Fire was his trial, perhaps smoke, perhaps flame, perhaps heat that seared but did not consume. To be a lion was to embody strength, courage, and purification, to burn away the dross of mortality. Above these four servant grades were three exalted ones, the fathers. The fifth was Perses the Persian, tied to the moon. Here the initiate assumed the very guise of Mithras's supposed homeland, cloaking himself in the exotic garb of the East. He became guardian of sacred fruits, custodian of hidden wisdom. The Persian was not merely rank, it was a role, a reminder that the cult's borrowed antiquity was itself a mask of power. To pass this grade was to wear the mask knowingly, to step behind the illusion and wield it. The sixth was Heliodromus, the Sunrunner, blazing with the might of Sol. He was herald, torchbearer, representative of the unconquered sun itself. The initiate in this grade carried a whip and torch, ran symbolic courses as if driving the chariot of the sky. He became a servant of light, a herald of dawn, a mediator between Mithras and Sol Invictus. And at the pinnacle stood Pater the Father, cloaked in authority, crowned with wisdom, bearing the staff and ring of Saturn. The Father was leader of the community, teacher of mysteries, guardian of the cave. To reach this grade was to become, as Mithras himself, wise, unshakable, eternal. The Father was not merely rank but transformation, a man who had climbed through planets, who had passed through death, who stood now at the edge of the stars. These 7 grades were not arbitrary. They mirrored the 7 planetary spheres through which the soul was believed to ascend after death: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. At each stage, the initiate shed the vices of the planet and absorbed its virtues, purified step by step, until his soul was light enough to rise beyond the spheres to the eternal firmament. The Mithraeum itself, with its narrow benches and painted ceiling of stars, was the cosmos in miniature. To move through its grades was to walk the heavens, but ascent was not achieved by learning alone. It required ordeal. The initiate swore oaths in the name of the cosmos itself, binding his tongue in secrecy. He endured fire, water, hunger, cold. He faced mock death and symbolic rebirth. He was stripped of rank, name, and pride, then clothed in new garments, bearing new titles. The ordeal was not cruelty, it was alchemy, designed to break the old man and forge the new. For the soldier, it was the scar of branding. For the lion, the taste of honey instead of water. For the nymphus, the bridal veil. Each trial imprinted body and soul alike, a permanent memory, written not in ink, but in flesh, in fear, in ecstasy. To emerge from trial was to be reborn into the Brotherhood, a man remade in silence and secrecy. And at the end of it all, the handshake, the synodexio, sealed his bond. This was no casual greeting. It was the grip of eternity, a mark that he was no longer simply man, but initiate, participant in a cosmic covenant. Thus the 7 grades formed not only a hierarchy but a cosmology, a spiritual ladder disguised as ritual. To rise was to climb the planets. To ascend was to move closer to Mithras himself, the god who was born of stone, who slew the bull, who feasted with the sun, and who guided his faithful through death into starlight. The ladder of Mithras was steep, its rungs slick with ordeal, its ascent lit only by torchlight and secrecy. But those who climbed it believed they touched eternity. And at its summit, when the Father stood robed and crowned beneath the painted sky, the cave itself became the cosmos, and the initiate himself a star newly born. The 7 grades, with their ordeals and ascents, forged the initiate into a new being, Yet even in a brotherhood built on secrecy and trial, there was a rhythm of communal joy that bound the men together, the sacred banquet. If the Tauroctony was the drama of creation, the feast was its celebration. And in the flicker of lamplight, as bread was broken and wine poured, the brothers tasted the eternal meal of their god. Archaeology preserves the echoes of these feasts. In Mithraea across the empire, long stone benches line either side of the central aisle, perfectly arranged for reclining diners. Analysis of the floors has revealed the bones of chicken, pork, and game meats roasted and shared in ritual. Shards of pottery, an amphorae whisper of wine poured into cups, a mirror of the banquet carved on the reverse of the rotating Tauroctony slabs, Mithras and Sol reclining together, feasting upon the bull. To dine in the cave was to dine with the gods. The symbolism was potent. To consume the meat of the sacrificed bull was to internalize salvation itself. Bread, meat, and wine were not merely sustenance, they were cosmic participation. Every bite was a renewal of Mithras's victory, every cup a seal of eternal covenant. The meal blurred the boundary between man and God, between earth and heaven. In the darkness of the cave, the brothers became part of the same eternal feast that the god himself shared with the Sunday. But the banquet was more than sustenance of the body. It was a ritual of equality. Soldiers, slaves, merchants, freedmen, men of vastly different stations sat shoulder to shoulder at the table of Mithras. The empire outside was hierarchical, merciless in its divisions. But inside the cave, rank in society was eclipsed by rank in the mysteries. A slave might sit higher in the grades than his master. A soldier might feast beside a merchant as an equal. The meal created what the world outside could not, a fellowship beyond empire, a family bound not by blood but by oath. Yet the cave contained not only joy. Alongside Mithras and Sol, another figure haunted the temples. Archaeologists have uncovered statues of a terrifying deity, one that even in stone radiates dread. A human body, wrapped in coils of a serpent, crowned not with a human face, but with the roaring head of a lion. In its hands, it clutched keys and a scepter, the emblems of dominion. This was the god of time Aeon, the eternal, or in Persian echoes, Zurvan. Unlike Mithras, he was not personal, not savior or companion. He was inexorable necessity, the devourer of gods and men alike. Time, without mercy, without end. His serpent coils wound around his body, as the orbits of the planets wound around the cosmos. His lion's head roared with the terror of mortality and the inevitability of change. To gaze upon this figure was to feel awe and dread alike. Mithras promised salvation, ascent through the stars, fellowship in eternity. But the lion-headed god reminded every initiate of the truth that stood behind salvation, that time ruled all, that even gods bowed before eternity. He was not prayed to but confronted, a presence in the temple to remind the brothers that their mysteries unfolded within the endless turning of the heavens. Here too the cult drew upon Persian ideas. Certain Zoroastrian sects elevated Zurvan, infinite time, as the father of both Ahura Mazda, light, and Angra Mainyu, darkness. Time was the womb of good and evil, the ultimate principle from which all sprang. The Roman inventors of Mithraism may have reshaped this concept into their lion-headed monster, embodying the terror of eternity in a form both alien and unforgettable. The presence of Aeon in the Mithraeum deepened the mystery. Mithras was savior, yes, but not supreme. He himself operated within the coils of time. The banquet, joyous as it was, took place in the shadow of the lion-headed god. Salvation was real, but so was the devouring wheel of eternity. The two truths stood side by side, communion and terror, joy and inevitability. And there was another silence in the cave, one that speaks loudly to us today. In all the hundreds of Mithraea uncovered, with all their inscriptions and dedications, not one bears the name of a woman. No statue, no offering, no graffito records a female initiate. Mithraism was a brotherhood, and a brotherhood alone. Its mysteries, its banquets, its ordeals, All were for men. What then of the wives, daughters, and mothers of these initiates? They were excluded, left to the public cults of Rome, or to the mysteries of Isis and Magna Mater, which welcomed women. The silence of women in Mithraism is profound. The caves echo only with male voices, the clink of male cups, the vows of male oaths. If women knew of the feasts, they knew only from absence, from watching men descend into chambers forbidden to them. This exclusion sharpened the cult's identity. It was not a universal faith, but a secret army, a fellowship forged in the likeness of soldiers and sworn men. The Banquet and the lion-headed god together proclaimed its truth, salvation and fellowship, yes, but under the shadow of inexorable time and the silence of half the world. From the stone benches of the feast to the roaring face of Aeon, the Mithraeum was a paradox: joy and dread, community and exclusion, salvation and inevitability. It was here that the Brotherhood became truly itself men, bound by blood, by bread, by wine, by terror, and by trust. But how did such a secretive cult, closed to women and hidden in caves, spread so far and so fast across an empire of hundreds of millions? The answer lies in Rome's most enduring machine, the army. From the damp stone of Britain's frontier forts to the dust-scorched sands of Syria, the cult of Mithras spread with a force more disciplined than any preacher's sermon: the Roman army. The legions were not only Rome's sword, but her bloodstream, moving men, goods, and ideas across continents. Soldiers carried with them not only their armor and oaths of loyalty to Caesar, but also their mysteries, and among these, none was more suited to a soldier's life than Mithras. For the legionary, life was defined by hardship, violence, and the constant nearness of death. The Mithraic cult mirrored that reality. Its ordeals demanded courage, its rituals forged loyalty, its god embodied strength and salvation. Mithras was no distant Olympian reclining in splendor, but a warrior, dagger in hand, born from stone itself. To pledge oneself to him was to enlist in a second army, one that promised not only comradeship in this life but salvation in the cosmos to come. Archaeological evidence confirms this military bond. The greatest density of Mithraea appears not in the grand capitals but along the limes, the fortified borders of the empire. Shrines huddle near forts on the Rhine and Danube, crouch in garrisons along Hadrian's wall, and hide in desert outposts where soldiers watched the horizon for Parthian arrows. These were not extravagant sanctuaries. Many were modest, carved or built by the men themselves, dim chambers of secrecy in a world of open war. Yet within them, a soldier could find brothers bound not only by orders but by oath, not only by Rome but by Mithras. The cult adapted itself to these frontiers. At Dura Europos in Syria, frescoes depict Mithras not only slaying the bull but also riding as a mounted archer. In Parthian style, a vision of the god reshaped for men who faced Persian cavalry across the desert. Mithras was a chameleon, his essence unchanged but his mask shifting to suit his followers' world. Nor were the initiates limited to common soldiers. Centurions, Rome's hardened professional officers, often acted as patrons of Mithraea. In dedicatory inscriptions, their names appear as builders, funders, leaders. To sit as pater in the cave was to wield a second authority, alongside the military rank of centurion. The cult offered these officers more than personal salvation. It offered them a network of loyalty, a fraternity that reinforced the discipline of their commands. This network extended far beyond the army. Merchants, too, found in Mithras a sacred passport. In bustling ports like Ostia, inscriptions reveal traders dedicating altars to the rock-born god, sealing their contracts with oaths of brotherhood. To belong to Mithras's mysteries was to carry a bond that crossed borders. A merchant who descended into a Mithraeum in Africa could find the same relief, the same ritual, the same handshake that he had known in Italy. A stranger could become brother with a single gesture, the synodexio. Even slaves joined. In the daylight world, they were property, nameless, stripped of dignity. But in the cave, they could climb the grades of initiation, sit beside their masters as equals, and receive the same promise of eternal salvation. Mithraism inverted society, replacing bloodline with brotherhood. For men trapped in chains, this was a promise as radical as any rebellion. In this, the cult's genius is clear. It was both deeply practical and profoundly spiritual. It offered networks of trust in a dangerous world, a fellowship that ensured aid and loyalty, and at the same time, a vision of the cosmos where sacrifice birthed life and the soul could ascend to the stars. But for all its strength, Mithraism bore within itself the seeds of its decline. Its very secrecy limited its growth. By excluding women, the cult cut away half the empire's population. By demanding arduous initiations, it kept its numbers small. It was a religion for the few, not the many. While its mysteries suited the barracks and caravans, they could not compete with the public festivals and open temples that drew crowds into Christianity. The 3rd century saw the rise of solar monotheism, with emperors like Aurelian promoting Sol Invictus as the supreme god of empire. Mithras, already bound to the sun, thrived in this atmosphere. Some saw him as the hidden name behind Sol, the secret mystery beneath the public cult. Yet when Constantine raised the banner of the cross, and later emperors outlawed pagan worship, Mithras's fate was sealed. The end was not always violent. In some places, Christian zealots smashed statues, decapitated altars, and filled in caves with rubble. The Mithraeum beneath San Clemente in Rome was deliberately buried, a Christian basilica rising upon its grave. In other places, silence fell without struggle. Temples were abandoned intact, their altars left untouched, as if the brothers had simply stopped coming, their ranks thinned by death, their oaths dissolved into time. By the 5th century, Mithraism had vanished, leaving behind only ruins, reliefs, and silence. Its temples became foundations for churches, its banquets replaced by the Eucharist, its rock-born God overshadowed by the Christ. Yet its echoes linger. The imagery of bread, wine, sacrifice, salvation, all haunt the comparison with Christianity, whether by imitation or coincidence. The two faiths mirrored one another, rivals in the same empire, one surviving, the other consigned to stone. And yet, to call Mithraism a failure is to miss its strange triumph. For centuries it bound men across continents, from slaves to centurions, into a secret fellowship. It offered meaning in a brutal world, hope in the face of death, and a map of the cosmos carved into stone. Even now, its silence seduces us. We lean toward its altars, trying to hear prayers never written, oaths never spoken, feasts never recorded. Perhaps this is its true power, not what it revealed, but what it concealed. The cult of Mithras reminds us that not all mysteries yield their secrets, that some gods thrive precisely because they remain veiled. In the end, we cannot know the words whispered in the dark, nor the feelings of those who emerged from the cave reborn. But we can know this. For a time, in the heart of the Roman world, men knelt beneath the earth, lifted their cups to a god born of stone, and believed themselves bound not only to each other, but to the stars. And though the lamps are long extinguished, their smoke still clings to the stones, and in the silence of those caves, Mithras waits.